The sound that ripped me from my sleep wasn't the gentle chirping of birds or the soft rustle of wind through the trees. It was a violent, mechanical roar, like a metal beast tearing through the morning silence. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. The red numbers on the digital clock read 7:03 a.m. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I threw off the heavy duvet, grabbed my silk robe, and sprinted down the hallway, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. By the time I reached the back door, the noise was deafening, a high-pitched whine that vibrated in my teeth. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the keys once before throwing the door open. The scene before me made my knees go weak. A landscaping crew of 3 men, dressed in neon yellow vests and heavy boots, was tearing through my backyard. They weren't trimming the hedges or weeding the flower beds. They were erasing my sanctuary. My prize-winning hydrangeas, the ones that had just started to bloom in vibrant, breathtaking shades of electric blue and deep purple, were being slashed to the ground. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and crushed petals. Standing near the property line, looking utterly bored and holding a clipboard, was Ferris. He was wearing his pristine white tennis outfit, not a speck of dirt on him. I screamed at the workers to stop, my voice raw, but the roar of the machinery drowned me out completely. Ferris didn't even look at me. He simply raised a manicured hand and pointed a finger at my front door. I ran around the side of the house to see what he was pointing at. Taped to the wood was a bright orange notice. HOA violation 402, unsightly vegetation. Immediate removal ordered. I fell to my knees in the dirt, ignoring the way the damp soil stained the hem of my clean robe. The silence that followed the chainsaw's engine finally cutting off was somehow worse than the noise. It was a heavy, final silence. The air smelled sharp with the scent of sap and destruction. This wasn't just a garden to me. I grabbed a handful of the severed stems, the sticky plant juice coating my fingers like green blood. I had planted these bushes with my father exactly 2 weeks before he passed away from cancer. We had spent hours mixing the soil, checking the pH balance, and talking about life, death, and everything in between. This garden was my sanctuary. It was where I went to talk to him when the grief got too loud. Ferris leaned over the white vinyl fence that separated our yards. He adjusted his expensive sunglasses, a cruel smirk playing on his thin lips. "It looked like a jungle, Joel," he said, his voice dripping with condescension and fake pity. "You have to understand, property values matter more than sentiment. We can't have you dragging down the neighborhood aesthetic with your weeds." I looked up at him, tears blurring my vision. He didn't see a grieving daughter trying to hold onto a memory. He saw a nuisance to be managed. He turned and walked back toward his massive, sprawling house, tapping his clipboard. The sadness in my chest began to harden. It cooled rapidly, transforming from soft grief into a cold, dangerous rage. He had taken the one thing I couldn't replace, and he had done it with a smile. I spent the rest of the morning crying in the shower, letting the hot water mix with my tears, but by the afternoon, the tears had stopped completely. I sat at my computer and opened my email, my jaw set tight. There, at the very top of my inbox, was a message from the Homeowners Association. The subject line was simply, "Invoice." I clicked it open, and my breath caught in my throat. Not only had Ferris destroyed my garden without my permission, but the HOA had slapped me with a massive fine. It was for $5,000. The line items included cost of professional removal, administrative fees, and a vaguely worded, insulting charge for emotional distress to neighbors. My husband, Lachlan, came home from work an hour later. He saw the invoice on the screen and his face turned a deep, angry red. "I'm going over there," he growled, rolling up his sleeves as he turned toward the door. "I'm going to tear that clipboard out of his hands and make him eat it." I stood up quickly and blocked his path, placing my hands on his chest. "No," I said firmly, staring into his eyes. "If we fight him physically or even go over there and yell, they win. They will call the police, paint us as the aggressors, and sue us. Ferris wants a reaction." Lachlan looked at me, seeing the steel in my eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. "So what do we do?" he asked, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "We pay." "No," I replied, turning back to the computer. "We fight on paper. We use their rules against them." The following Tuesday, I attended the monthly HOA meeting to appeal the fine. I walked into the community center holding a thick folder of photos showing that my garden was well-maintained, healthy, and beautiful. The room was cold, the air conditioning blasting. Petra, Ferris's wife and the HOA president, sat at the head of the long table like a queen on a throne. She smiled at me when I entered, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a shark smile, all teeth and no warmth. I stood up and started to present my case, showing that my hydrangeas were a recognized species and not weeds, and that I had never received a warning. "Joel, sweetie," Petra interrupted, cutting me off mid-sentence with a wave of her hand. "We updated the neighborhood aesthetic guide yesterday." She slid a glossy, freshly printed pamphlet across the table toward me. "Hydrangeas of that size are considered unruly now. We prefer a cleaner look." I looked at the date on the pamphlet. It was printed the same day they cut my garden down. It was a setup. The other board members, all cronies of Ferris and Petra, snickered behind their hands. They began to mock my peasant garden, comparing it unfavorably to Ferris's brand-new 2-story luxury detached garage that loomed over the fence line. "We need sleek," Petra said, smoothing her hair. "We need modern, not whatever that emotional mess was." The vote to uphold the fine was unanimous. I walked out, my folder heavy in my hand, feeling the weight of their laughter on my back. The situation escalated quickly after the meeting. The invoice stated a strict 30-day payment term. If we didn't pay the $5,000 by the deadline, the HOA threatened to place a lien on our house. A lien meant we couldn't refinance, we couldn't sell, and it would destroy our credit score. Lachlan and I sat at the kitchen table late that night, looking at our savings account on the laptop. We had been saving for years for our son's college tuition. We had exactly enough to cover his first 2 years, but if we paid this fine, that fund would be decimated. We would be starting over from zero. "We can't afford this," Lachlan whispered, his head in his hands, his voice thick with despair. "But we can't afford to lose the house either." I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I stood up and looked out the kitchen window. Ferris was in his driveway washing his bright red Tesla. He was standing in front of his massive, detached garage, his pride and joy. He looked up, saw me watching through the glass, and gave a little wave. "Maybe you should sell." He shouted across the lawn, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "This neighborhood is getting a bit expensive for some people. You don't want to go broke trying to keep up." His arrogance was suffocating. He thought he had crushed us. He thought it was over. I couldn't sleep that night. Ferris's words kept echoing in my head like a broken record. Property values, rules, aesthetic. I needed a way out. I needed a loophole. I got out of bed at 2:00 a.m., moving quietly so I wouldn't wake Lachlan. I went to the hallway and pulled down the creaky ladder to the attic. The air up there was hot, stale, and smelled of dust and old cedar wood. I crawled over the wooden beams to the far corner where we kept the family records. My family had owned this house for 3 generations. My grandfather bought the land when it was just open fields. I dug through box after box of old tax returns, photo albums, and Christmas decorations. I was looking for the original bylaws, hoping to find a clause about grandfathered landscaping that would save me. I searched for an hour, sneezing from the dust. I didn't find the bylaws. Instead, at the bottom of a water-damaged cardboard box, I found a rusted metal tube. It was capped at both ends. I pried the cap off and slid out a roll of yellowed parchment. It wasn't a map of the world or a poster. It was a hand-drawn land survey from 1974, signed by the county clerk. I unrolled it carefully, the paper crinkling in the silence. It showed the original plot lines before the subdivision was fully developed. I held it up to the dim light of the attic bulb, squinting at the lines. I brought the map down to the kitchen table and smoothed it out under the bright overhead light. My heart was starting to race, a thumping rhythm of hope against my ribs. I grabbed a heavy-duty measuring tape from Lachlan's toolbox. I slipped on my sneakers and went out the back door, moving quietly so the motion sensor lights on Ferris's garage wouldn't trigger and alert him. I used a small flashlight, keeping the beam pointed at the ground so I wouldn't be seen. According to the old map, my property line extended significantly further east than the current fence indicated. I located the old oak tree in the front yard, which was marked on the map as a boundary anchor. It had been there for 80 years. I hooked the tape measure to the base of the tree and walked toward the fence. I reached the fence, but the tape measure said I had more to go. I looked at the numbers. Then I looked at the white vinyl fence. Then I looked at the map again. If this document was accurate, the fence wasn't the property line. The property line was actually somewhere on the other side of that barrier. I stood there in the dark, the cool night air hitting my face, my breath catching in my throat. The next morning, I called Zayla. We had gone to college together, and she was now a high-powered real estate attorney known for being vicious when necessary. I met her for coffee at a small diner and showed her the photos of the old map on my phone. She studied them over the rim of her glasses, tapping her finger on the screen. "This is interesting, Joel," she said, her voice low. "But you have to understand, a 50-year-old hand-drawn map isn't admissible in court on its own. It proves intent, but it doesn't prove current legal boundaries. Technology has changed." "So what do I do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "You need a modern digital survey," she explained. "You need a licensed surveyor to come out and pin the corners with GPS coordinates. It's the only way to be 100% sure." "How much?" I asked, dreading the answer. "For a forensic survey, probably $2,000, she said. I swallowed hard. We were already facing a $5,000 fine. Spending another $2,000 was a massive gamble. It would wipe out the absolute last of our liquid savings. If I was wrong, we were destitute. But if I was right, I looked at Zayla. "Do it. Hire the best guy in the county." Eamon arrived 2 days later. He was a serious man with a weathered face and a white van full of high-tech equipment. I had specifically scheduled him to come while Ferris was at work, so there would be no confrontation. Eamon set up a yellow tripod with a spinning laser scanner on the sidewalk. He walked around the perimeter of the yard with a sensor on a tall metal pole, staring intently at a handheld computer screen. I stood on the porch, twisting my wedding ring, barely breathing. Lachlan stood behind me, his hand resting heavily on my shoulder. Eamon moved slowly, methodically. He checked the oak tree. He checked the utility box on the street. Then he walked toward the fence line between my house and Ferris. He stopped. He looked at his machine. He looked at the white vinyl fence. Then he looked back at the machine and frowned deeply. My stomach dropped to the floor. "Is there a problem?" I called out, my voice trembling. Eamon looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "No problem for you, ma'am," he said flatly, "but it looks like a big problem for him." Eamon reached into his heavy canvas bag and pulled out a bright neon orange stake and a heavy rubber mallet. He walked past the white vinyl fence, stepping around the edge of the property where the fence ended near the street. He walked right onto Ferris's perfectly manicured lawn. He walked past the flower beds. He stopped directly in the middle of the paved driveway leading to the detached garage. He drove the stake into the asphalt with 3 hard swings. Clang, clang, clang. The sound echoed through the neighborhood. Then he walked 12 feet further, right up to the side of the garage wall and sprayed a neon orange line on the beige stucco. "This," Eamon said, pointing to the line on the garage, "is the actual property line." I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. It wasn't just a few inches. The orange stake in the driveway was 12 feet past the current fence. Ferris hadn't just built his fence on my land. His entire beloved 2-story luxury garage was sitting squarely on my property. He had built his castle on my dirt. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He was trespassing. I called Zayla immediately, practically shouting the news into the phone. She laughed, a dark, delighted sound that made me smile for the first time in weeks. "Okay, Joel, listen to me closely," she said. "Do not say a word to him." "Not yet, we need to trap him." She gave me specific instructions. "Pay the HOA fine," she said. "I know it hurts, but pay it. Let them think they won. Let them think you are submissive and broken. We need them to feel completely safe." It was the hardest thing I ever did. I wrote the check for $5,000 to the HOA, feeling sick to my stomach. I walked it over to Petra's house and handed it to her personally. She smirked, looking at the check with glee, treating it like a trophy. "I knew you'd see reason, Joel," she said, tucking it into her pocket. "It's for the best. We have to maintain standards." I just nodded and walked away, biting my tongue until I tasted blood. They deposited the check the next day. Ferris was so emboldened by his victory that he started having contractors over. I overheard him in the yard planning an extension, a patio that would go even further onto the land he thought was his. We waited 3 days. We let the money clear their account. We let them get comfortable in their victory. Then Zayla struck. She sent a certified letter via courier requiring a signature. It wasn't from the HOA, and it wasn't a friendly neighbor note. It was on the heavy, cream-colored letterhead of her law firm. I watched from my living room window as the courier handed the thick envelope to Ferris. He looked confused, turning it over in his hands. He opened it right there on his porch. The letter was a formal cease and desist regarding criminal trespassing. It included a high-resolution copy of Eamon's new survey, showing the bright red line cutting through his garage. It demanded that he remove all personal property and structures from Joel's land within 14 days, or face legal action for damages and rent. It also demanded the immediate return of the land to its original condition. I saw Ferris read it. I saw his face go pale, then bright red. He looked over at my house, his eyes bulging with shock. Ferris didn't call his lawyer. He stormed across the lawn, marching right up to my front door like a bull. He banged on it with his fist, shaking the frame. "Joel, open this door," he screamed. I opened it calmly. Lachlan stood right behind me, ready to step in if needed. Ferris crumpled the heavy letter and threw it at my chest. "You think a piece of paper scares me?" He spat, veins popping in his neck, his face inches from mine. "I've lived here for 10 years. I built that garage 5 years ago. You can't just claim land because you drew a line on a map." He laughed, a manic, desperate sound. "It's called adverse possession, you idiot. Squatter's rights. I've been using it, so it's mine. I'll sue you for harassment." He was trying to intimidate me, to use his volume to make me back down like I had with the garden. I didn't flinch. I picked up the crumpled paper and smoothed it out. "I'm not discussing this with you, Ferris," I said, my voice steady and cool. "Talk to my lawyer, and get off my porch, you're trespassing." Petra panicked. She realized that if Ferris lost the garage, their property value would tank, and they would look like fools in front of the whole neighborhood. She tried to use her power as HOA president to fix it. She called an emergency board meeting for the very next night. The agenda had one item: updating bylaws regarding property line disputes. She wanted to pass a new rule stating that existing structures are exempt from property line disputes between neighbors. It was a blatant, corrupt attempt to use the HOA to override state law. Zayla told me to go and record everything. I walked into the meeting with my phone held high, live streaming to the neighborhood Facebook group. "So, Petra," I asked loudly, interrupting her speech, "you're trying to change the rules just to save your husband's illegal garage." Petra stuttered, her face flushing a deep crimson. The other neighbors, who were watching the stream from their homes, started commenting furiously. They were tired of Petra's tyranny. They saw the corruption in real time. The motion failed because the other board members were too scared of the public backlash to vote for it. Ferris wasn't done. He was convinced my surveyor was a fraud or that I had bribed him. He hired his own survey company, paying a massive rush fee to get them out there on a Saturday. He stood over the surveyor, a young guy who looked terrified, practically breathing down his neck. "Make sure you get it right," Ferris growled, pointing at the ground. "She's trying to steal my land." I watched from my kitchen window, sipping tea, feeling strangely calm. The young surveyor did his work. He measured, he checked the GPS, he checked the monuments. After an hour, he walked up to Ferris, wiping sweat from his forehead. I cracked the window to hear. "Well," Ferris demanded, "tell me she's wrong." The surveyor shook his head, looking nervous. "Actually, sir, her guy was generous. He put the line at 12 feet. According to my instruments, you're actually over the line by 12 feet and 6 inches. Ferris turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. His knees seemed to buckle. His own hired gun had just confirmed the death sentence for his garage. The reality finally set in for Ferris. He couldn't bully his way out, and the HOA couldn't save him. He changed tactics completely. Sunday afternoon, he came to my door. He wasn't screaming this time. He was wearing a soft cashmere sweater and holding a bottle of expensive wine. He was trying to act neighborly. "Joel Lachlan," he said, forcing a smile that looked painful. "Look, this has all gone out of hand. Lawyers are expensive, right? We don't need courts involved in this." He set the wine on the porch railing. "I want to make you an offer. I'll buy that strip of land from you. It's just a driveway and a bit of garage to you, but it's important to me." He pulled out a checkbook. "I'll give you $10,000 right now. That covers your fine, gives you a nice bonus, and we forget this ever happened." I looked at him, I looked at the bare patch of dirt where my hydrangeas used to be. "It's not for sale, Ferris," I said. "My father walked that land. It belongs to this house." Ferris's smile faltered, his eyes hardening. Okay, sentiment, I get it." He scribbled in the checkbook, tearing the page out. 50,000, he said. "That's way above market value for a strip of dirt. You can pay for your kids' college." Lachlan shifted behind me. I could feel his hesitation. $50,000 was life-changing money for us. It would solve all our problems instantly. Ferris saw the hesitation and pounced. 75,000, he said, his voice tight. "Final offer. You'd be stupid to walk away from that kind of cash." I looked at Ferris's face. I saw the same arrogance he had when he destroyed my garden. If I took the money, he won. He learned that he could do whatever he wanted as long as he wrote a check. "You reported me for a garden, Ferris," I said softly. "You made me pay $5,000 because you love rules so much. You said property values matter more than sentiment. Well, the rule says that is my land." I stepped back. "This isn't about money, it's about the rules, and you're breaking them." I closed the door in his face. The deadline in the cease and desist letter passed. Ferris didn't move his garage. He instructed his lawyer to file a formal claim for adverse possession. He was banking on the fact that since he had used the land for 10 years without us complaining, the court would grant it to him. He thought he had a slam-dunk case. But Zayla had an ace up her sleeve. We met in her office to prepare our response. "In our state," Zayla explained, grinning like a wolf who had cornered its prey, "adverse possession has a specific requirement that most people forget. You can't just occupy the land. You have to have paid property taxes on it for the entire duration of the occupation." She pulled out the county tax records. "Joel, you and your family have paid the taxes on that entire plot for 50 years. Ferris has only paid taxes on his legal lot. Because he had never paid the tax on the stolen strip, his legal defense evaporated instantly. He had no claim. He was just a trespasser. Petra and Ferris were cornered animals now. Desperate, Petra started a smear campaign. She posted on the neighborhood app, claiming that Joel was extorting them and trying to ruin the neighborhood's character. She urged people to harass us, painting us as greedy villains. That night, a brick crashed through our front living room window, shattering the glass and sending shards flying onto the rug. Attached to the brick was a note. "Be a good neighbor." We called the police. They took a report and dusted the brick for prints, but the effect on the neighborhood was the opposite of what Petra intended. People were horrified. The violence turned the tide completely. The neighbors who had been on the fence realized that Petra and Ferris were unhinged. They started bringing us casseroles and apologizing for not speaking up sooner. The community isolated the tyrants, leaving them alone in their big house. The court date finally arrived. We sat on the plaintiff's side. Ferris and his expensive legal team sat on the defense. Ferris looked tired, dark circles under his eyes. His lawyer tried to argue hardship. He told the judge that tearing down the garage would cost over $100,000 and diminish the property value. He argued it was an innocent mistake and that removing it was too harsh a punishment. The judge, a stern woman with glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor, looked through the evidence. She looked at the photos of my destroyed hydrangeas. She looked at the receipt for the $5,000 HOA fine. She looked at the cease and desist letter. She lowered her glasses and looked directly at Ferris. "Mr. Ferris," she asked quietly, "did you show this woman mercy when she violated a planting rule? Did you consider her hardship when you levied a fine she couldn't afford?" Ferris stayed silent, staring at his shoes. "You demand strict adherence to rules when it benefits you," the judge said, "but plead hardship when the rules apply to you. That is not how the law works." The gavel banged, and the sound rang through the courtroom like a bell. The verdict was total victory. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. She ordered the immediate removal of the encroachment. Ferris was given 30 days to remove the garage and restore the land to its original condition. But she didn't stop there, because the encroachment was proven to be willful trespassing. Since he ignored the first survey and the cease and desist, she ordered him to pay all of my legal fees. She ordered him to refund the $5,000 HOA fine with interest, and she awarded punitive damages for the destruction of my original garden. Ferris had walked into court trying to save his garage. He walked out owing me nearly $40,000 and facing a demolition bill. He looked like he was going to be sick right there in the courtroom. The 30-day clock began to tick. We watched Ferris's house closely. Day 5 passed. Day 10. Day 20. He didn't hire a crew. He didn't move his cars. He was stalling. He was arrogant to the bitter end. He believed that I wouldn't actually enforce the order. He thought I didn't have the stomach for demolition. He thought I was bluffing. On the night of day 29, Ferris threw a party. He opened the big bay doors of the garage, blasting music late into the night. He had guests spilling out onto the driveway, onto my land. He was mocking the court order. He was showing everyone that he was still the king of the neighborhood. I watched from my bedroom window, the bass thumping against the glass. Lachlan paced behind me. "He thinks he's won," Lachlan said. "No," I whispered. "He's celebrating his own funeral. Enjoy it, Ferris." It's the last night. Day 30 dawned bright and clear. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, I didn't walk over to Ferris's house alone. I walked over with the county sheriff and a commercial demolition crew I had hired myself, the bill for which would be sent directly to Ferris as per the court order. The sheriff pounded on the garage door. Ferris opened it, wearing a robe, looking bleary-eyed from the party the night before. He saw the sheriff. He saw the massive yellow excavator idling in the street, its engine rumbling. He saw me holding the court order. His face went slack. "What is this?" he stammered. "This is the end of the 30 days, the sheriff said loudly. "You failed to comply with the judge's order. The plaintiff is now authorized to remove the structure." The sheriff checked his watch. "You have 10 minutes to evacuate your luxury cars, or they will be crushed along with the roof." Ferris scrambled, screaming for Petra, running barefoot to find his keys. This was the moment, the visual climax of months of torture. Ferris managed to back his Tesla and his Porsche out of the garage, parking them haphazardly on the street. He stood on the sidewalk, clutching Petra's hand. The neighbors had come out onto their porches, drinking coffee, watching the spectacle. It was a neighborhood event. The operator of the excavator revved the engine. The massive metal arms swung around. The claw crunched into the roof of the luxury garage with the sound of snapping timber and shattering glass. Dust billowed into the air. Ferris let out a wail, actually crying, as the second strike took out the front wall, exposing the insulation and drywall. Petra was screaming at the police officers, who simply stood there with their arms crossed. The tyrant's castle was crumbling. It was glorious, loud, messy destruction. I stood there, feeling the vibration of the machine in my feet, and for the first time in months, I felt light. The structure that represented his arrogance was reduced to a pile of rubble in less than an hour. 6 months later, the dust had literally and figuratively settled. Ferris and Petra couldn't handle the humiliation. They put their house up for sale and moved to a different state, leaving behind a legacy of shame. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful again, the toxicity gone with them. I stood in my backyard, a mug of hot tea in my hand. The garage was gone. The asphalt had been ripped up and hauled away. In its place, on the 12 feet of reclaimed land that was rightfully mine, I had planted a new row of hydrangeas. They were young, but they were growing fast, their leaves green and healthy. I reached out and touched a soft petal, feeling the life in it. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I looked up at the blue sky. "We won, Dad," I whispered. The camera of my mind panned out, leaving the perfect, blooming garden basking in the sun, a beautiful testament to the power of standing your ground and fighting for what is yours.